going to be speaking from an advanced manual called Interpretive Reading, which I don't know if you've ever met before, but it's quite fun, and I recommend it to all. The timing is 5 to 7, Christine. It's on green, actually, at the moment. And interpretive reading really is you read from a book, which sounds like the easiest speech you can ever give. Well, maybe it is, which is why I recommend it. It's quite fun, and it gets you to read interesting books. So I thought about, well, what book should I read from? So I thought about the pop-up Kama Sutra. Unfortunately, it seems to be a bit short of words. So I thought, well, perhaps that would be not really becoming of this. So I thought perhaps managerial accounting. Well, perhaps not. So finally, I decided that actually I'm going to read about one of the most exciting stories the world has ever had. And that is the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamen, or as you guys say in the States, King Tut. Actually, I don't know any other country that calls it King Tut, but I didn't know who King Tut was. It took me about 3 years before I figured out that King Tut equals King Tutankhamen. Anyway, so as you may know, it was 1922, and a British guy called Howard Carter discovers the tomb. And we're going to read from, well, it's his book actually, about what it was really like to discover that. And he'd spent many years, something like 6 years, trying to find an interesting tomb that hadn't been discovered in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. And he discovers it totally by accident, and what it's like to look inside to see this incredible treasure he talks about. Now, some of you may have actually seen the treasure. Who's seen any of these? Okay, great. So about at least half of you have seen King Tut. So as you probably know, the tomb was robbed a couple of times, but there was still an enormous amount left. This was a young pharaoh who died, well, he died young. Anyway, without further ado. Use reading glasses nowadays. Okay, so he's an English guy, this guy, and he's something like 40, 50 years old. So try to imagine my accent. The history of the valley, as I've endeavoured to show in former chapters, has never, he was not really a dramatic guy to start with. Has never really lacked the dramatic element, and in this, the latest episode, it has held to its traditions. For consider the circumstances. This was to be our final season in the valley. 6 full seasons we had excavated there, and season after season had drawn a blank. We had worked for months at a stretch and found nothing. And only an excavator knows how desperately depressing that can be. We had almost made up our minds that we were beaten, and we were preparing to leave the valley and try our luck elsewhere. And then, hardly had we set hoe to ground in our last despairing effort, then we made a discovery that far exceeded our wildest dreams. Surely, never before, in the whole history of excavation, has a full digging season been compressed within the space of 5 days. Hardly had I arrived on work next morning than the unusual silence, due to the stoppage of the work, made me realise that something out of the extraordinary had happened. And I was greeted by the announcement that a step cut in the rock had been discovered underneath the very first hut to be attacked. This seemed too good to be true, but a short amount of extra clearing revealed the fact that we were actually in the entrance of a steep cut in the rock, some 13 feet below the entrance to the tomb of Ramses VI, and a similar depth from the present bed level of the valley. I'd almost dared to hope that we'd found our tomb at last. Work continued feverishly through the whole of the day and the morning of the next, but it was not until the afternoon of the 5th of November, that we succeeded in clearing away the masses of rubbish. I'm sort of reading extracts. While examining the seals, I noticed at the top of the doorway, where some of the plaster had fallen away, a heavy wooden lintel. Under this, to assure myself of the method by which the doorway had been blocked, I made a small peephole, just large enough to insert an electric torch, and discovered that the passage beyond the door was filled completely from floor to ceiling with stones and rubble, additional proof this of the care with which the tomb had been protected. It was a thrilling moment for an excavator. Alone, save for my native workmen, I found myself, after years of comparatively unproductive labour, on the threshold of what might prove to be a magnificent discovery. Anything, literally anything, might lie beyond that passage, and it needed all my self-control to keep from breaking down the doorway and investigating one thing, then and there. Once more I examined the seal impressions for a clue, but on the part of the door so far laid bare only those of the royal necropolis seal already mentioned. Had I but known that a few inches lower down there was a perfectly clear and distinct impression of the seal of Tutankhamen, the king I most desired to have found, I would have cleared on, had a much better night's rest in consequence, and saved myself nearly 3 weeks of uncertainty. Just imagining. It was late, however, and darkness was already upon us. With some reluctance, I reclosed the small hole that I'd made, filled in our excavation for protection during the night, selected the most trustworthy of my workmen, themselves almost as excited as I was, to watch all night above the tomb, and so home by moonlight, riding down the valley. Naturally, my wish was to go straight ahead with our clearing to find out the full extent of the discovery, but Lord Carnarvon, that's his patron who paid for these 6 years of his studies, was in England, and in fairness to him, I had to delay matters until he could come. Accordingly, I sent him the following cable: "At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact, recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations." So there were a couple of exchanges of telegrams and so on, and finally, 3 weeks later, this guy appears, along with the chief inspector of tombs in Egypt and all this sort of thing. Probably imagine. The day following, 26th November, was the day of days, the most wonderful that I've ever lived through, and certainly one whose like I can never hope to see again. Throughout the morning, the work of clearing continued, slowly perforce, on account of the delicate objects that were mixed with the filling. Then, in the middle of the afternoon, 30 feet down from the outer door, we came upon a second sealed doorway, almost an exact replica of the first. The seal's impressions in this case were less distinct, but still recognizable as those of Tutankhamen and the royal necropolis. Here again, the signs of opening and reclosing were clearly marked upon the plaster. We were firmly convinced by this time that it was a cache that we were about to open, not a tomb. We were soon to know. There lay the sealed doorway, and behind it was the answer to the question. Slowly, desperately slowly, it seemed to us as we watched, the remains of passage debris that encumbered the lower part of the doorway were removed, until at last we had the whole door clear before us. The decisive moment had arrived. With trembling hands, I made a tiny breach in the upper left-hand corner. Darkness and blank space, as far as an iron testing rod could reach, showed that whatever lay beyond was empty and not filled like the passage we had cleared. Candle tests were applied as a precaution against possible foul gases, and then widening the hole a little, I inserted a candle and peered in. Lord Carnarvon, Lady Evelyn, and Calendar standing anxiously beside me to hear the verdict. At first, I could see nothing, the hot air escaping from the chamber causing the candle flame to flicker. But presently, as my eyes grew accustomed to the light, details of the room within emerged slowly from the mist. Strange animals, statues, and gold. Everywhere, the glint of gold. For the moment, an eternity it must have seemed to the others standing by, I was struck dumb with amazement. And when Lord Carnarvon, unable to stand the suspense any longer, inquired anxiously, can you see anything? It was all I could do to get out the words, yes. Wonderful things. Then widening the hole a little further so that we both could see, we inserted an electric torch. Go ahead like that. Okay, so take a minute to write a few comments, if you like.